I'm surrounded by a group of Ringsend beauties. Now, girls, would you marry a fella from Inchicore or Blackrock?
No.
We'd rather have Ringsend.
Yes, I'd rather have Ringsend fellas.
Yeah. Yeah.
And why would you rather have Ringsend fellas?
Because they're our own kind.
They're our own kind.
Because when you're marrying someone from Ringsend, you know who you're marrying.
There's queer things in Dublin, between House and Cromwell. Down in Ringsend there's a five-legged cat and a three-legged donkey, a two-headed monkey. There's nothing so queer as his four-faced outlaw.
Ringsend was at one time the harbour of Dublin. It's an early 17th century town. It has had a coloured and chequered history. It has seen days of riches, and days of rags. There's a nice bit of fish there. That's a genuine Ringsend ray.
Your seaside when you're eating it.
Raytown, Ringsend. Well, I suppose the nickname Raytown came from the fish. But in the year 1331, a famine swept Dublin, and only for the large shoals of fish swept up here at Ringsend, the people of Dublin would have starved. The annals list them as being turtle hides, or actually small whales, that came up here 30 and 40 feet long and were cut off the coast at Ringsend. Now, the name Ringsend itself has two sources of supply, so you can take your pick. One set of historians favour that it's from the Gaelic word rin, meaning a point of land. Now, Ringsend is a point of land. But the second set of historians say that the name came from the iron rings that were put into the wall to tie up the ships. And here, the rings ended, and this place here was known as the end of the rings, or Ringsend. The Dodder River, the gateway to Ringsend, today as it has been down through the centuries. 777 years ago, the Dodder was the boundary for the liberties of the city of Dublin. The old river, in 1280, it was given to a fellow named Robert le Bagot. Now, he'd be the man that gave his name to Bagot Street. And later, as the years went by, mills and industry sprang up all along the banks of the Dodder. From here now out to Rathfarnham, there'll be anything up to 15 to 18 mills. There was whiskey, there was calico, there was paper, there was rope. Aye, there was salt works and lime works, and there was iron works in Ringsend. Now, before the bridge was built, when Ringsend was the harbour, the passengers, of course, coming in, had no way of getting across the Dodder, which was flooding down into the Liffey. So the boys in Ringsend designed what was known as the Ringsend car. Now, it used to cost a halfpenny to cross the Halfpenny Bridge, or the metal bridge, but to cross the Dodder, it cost fourpence. Now, in 1650, the corporation decided to put up the bridge. So the bridge was put up, and that put an end to the Ringsend cars. But the Ringsend men took the bridge down again, and the cars rolled again. And then the bridge went back up again. And then, for some unknown reason, the course of the river changed, and the bridge was over dry land. And of course, the Ringsend people said that that was nature's way of punishing them for taking the bread out of their mouths. St. Patrick's Church has a very fine relic. It's a solid silver chalice which was presented to a Dominican friar, Henry Burgett, by his mother and father on his ordination day in 1639. Now, how did a chalice in Limerick get up to Dublin? Well, possibly during the penal times when Father Henry was on the run, and maybe stopped off in Ringsend on his way down to the ship to say Mass in a Mass house, and maybe leave the chalice as a souvenir and an act of kindness, or maybe a gift to the man that was keeping on the tradition of the faith in Ringsend. The traffic in Ringsend is a big problem, not only to the children, but to the old people, and the paths are narrow. Even if they run out of a shop, they're having a chance. They're out under a bus. And speaking of buses, the way they fly up and down today, it's hard to believe that when the tram company started the electric trams, they gave a little booklet to the conductor and the driver. And rule number 14 or 15 was that the conductor and driver were to salute to the pedestrians as they passed by. Now and again, they were to stop the trams and invite the pedestrians aboard. In other words, if the people went to walk, the tram man was to say, would you like to get on the tram today and go into Nelson's Pillar? Could you imagine the buses doing that now? So if you close your eyes at the bus stop, they're gone. Well, how are you keeping?
All right.
That's good, not bad. Nice seeing you. See you, lads. Yeah. So there we are. There's the boys of Ringsend, and back down there's the surgery. Dr. A. Poolman, and his hours 10 to 1 and 10 to 12 and 6 to 8:30. The doctor's shop in Ringsend. The Irish house in Ringsend. And all the different names on the shops showed the different origins that the people came from. The Italians, the Irish, the Normans, Scandinavians. Isn't it amazing the way the names on the walls reflect the trades that were in the area? How are you doing? Great evening. Yes, indeed it is. Aikenhead Terrace, Ringsend. This is where Mary Aikenhead started our first hospital in Dublin. It was up in Irishtown that herself and 4 sisters started the order, the Irish Sisters of Charity. During the years 1831 and 1832, there was a fever epidemic brought out all over Dublin, but particularly here in Ringsend. And Mary Aikenhead founded a hospital for the poor. That would have been a forerunner of the Vincent's Hospital, and the hospital out at Ellenfield today, and the Hospice of the Dying in Hurdles Cross. And it's nice to see that her name is still remembered here in Ringsend. I'm standing in the footsteps of Oliver Cromwell, who landed here at Ringsend on the 15th of August, 1649. He had 8,000 foot soldiers, 4,000 horse soldiers, a train of artillery, warlike supplies of every description, 2 proclamations, one against drink and one against bad language, and thousands of cabbage plants. It seems cabbage was the favourite veg of the Cromwellian army, and when they weren't butchering the people of Ireland, they were cultivating the growth of cabbage up in the cabbage garden in the Liberties in Dublin. Well, this is where Mr. Oliver landed and marched on Dublin City on that August day in 1649. old are you, John?
I'm not to tell you, 90 next March.
90 next March.
Get back on.
They won't believe
Yeah.
the age of this fella
Oh,
here.
no. Did you not tell you he's age 21?
90. My God,
Next March.
huh?
He's an old sailor.
Isn't he sticking
now.
it well? He's
Yeah,
an old
he is,
sailor
I'm
of
telling you.
Ringsend. A raytown. That's Ringsend cabbage. Now I'm wondering, would that young headed cabbage know that when its ancestors first came to Ireland, they landed here in Ringsend in 1649? I suppose, you know, there's no water here in the fountain. It'd be nice if you had a bit of a monument to a headed cabbage in memory of its first coming to Dublin in 1649 to Raytown, Ringsend. Where's that woman with the pot? Go in and get the pot. Well, Elizabeth, there's only one place for that headed cabbage.
What's the posh
I tell you what to do, Elizabeth. You go in and put a few pig's feet and a bit of bacon in and that.
A few turnips and parsnips, and let me be right for the
And
dinner.
me and the captain will be in for dinner in a few
I
minutes.
know.
Summertime is swimming time. There'll be all sorts of swimmings here, the backstroke and the breaststroke, the overhand. They'll be acting Johnny Weismuller. They'll be acting the high divers with the jackknife and the swallow, and a few belly flappers as well. The children are brought down here at a very early age, 2 and 3, and held into the water, baptised in it. And from that day on, they become swimmers. They're great swimmers. They can swim anything. Could swim the channel from here. There's a great rowing tradition in Ringsend. Of course, this dates back to the old days of the skiff racing, out to meet the ships in the harbour, because the first skiff out got the biggest load to bring back, and of course got back again to make another few bob. So this built up the tradition among the rowing clubs. And what these lads today are doing is pleasure. Their grandfathers and their great-grandfathers did as work. Aye, and hard work it was too, rowing out from Ringsend out beyond the Poolbeg lighthouse to meet the ships and bring in the passengers.
Pressure on it. Come on. Come on, we're heading for this yet. Come on, right back it, right back it. Come on, lads. Get the back, come on. That's the stuff.
The Irish Amateur Rowing Association has a lot of rowing clubs affiliated from Dublin. The Neptune and the Commercial and the Phoenix and the Dolphin. Now, they can talk what way they like about jogging and running for health, but for that rowing act, now, you'd want to have your breakfast, dinner and tea in you before you get out there and start pulling and shoving those heavy oars. But sure, I suppose there's no better place to be on a lovely summer's evening than out there in the water, rowing away to your heart's content. Coal. Sure, it was the coal, in a way, that was responsible for the development of the port of Dublin, because it was the heavy coal ships that couldn't get up the river, and it was the coal merchants who roared the loudest at the process meetings that got the Act of Parliament for establishing the Port and Docks Board. The Ringsend bus depot, one time this was the electric generating station that ran the 330 electric trams around Dublin. Or as the DUTC used to boast, we run 9.1 miles from the pillar and were generated from Ringsend. The IGB, the Irish Glass Bottle Company. There's a great neighbourliness about the people of Ringsend. They all know each other. You don't read your newspaper in the armchair. You come out in the sun and read it on the step of your doorway. It's a great place for dogs too. Dogs and children. Plenty of open space parks for the children to play in, which makes Ringsend a wonderful place to grow up in. Isn't it funny to think that at one time this park was underwater? This is all reclaimed land. Seagulls and sewage, and a fine bracing smell here this morning. You know, I can never pass the old pumping station or even the smells of the River Liffey without thinking of old Jasper Rogers. Now, Jasper was the man who drove the first steam car in Ireland, but I think Jasper's claim to fame was the plan he had to take the smell out of the Liffey. He had big gadgets that he'd put under the Liffey bridges that would draw up the smell off the Liffey. Now, we submitted this plan to the Dublin Corporation, but the Dublin Corporation shut it down. And Jasper was very disappointed, and he even said that not only could he take the smell off the Liffey, but with the contents of what he threw up under the bridges, he could start a fertiliser factory. I'd love to see Jasper down here this morning. He'd probably be able to start a fertiliser factory here as well. Well, this is all that's left of the Pigeon House sentry box in the fort here. I suppose in a way it was the Dutch and the French that built this. In 1672, the Dutch fleet put a blockade on the Thames River, so the English got very worried. Get over there quick to the second city of the empire and see what they could do in Dublin. So Bernard de Gaume was sent over, and he spent several months planning and looking, and he decided that the best thing to do was to build a big fort at Merrion Square, with walls running down here to the Pigeon House. But sure, nothing was done with Sir Bernard's plan. And 150 years went by. And it wasn't until Robert Demmett put his eye on the fort in 1803, and then they were worried about Napoleon, so they decided that they better get something done. So in 1813 the Pigeon House fort was built, and it cost £100,000. But 54 years later they sold it to the Dublin Corporation for £65,000. It used to be a great place for the safekeeping of jewels and documents and all stuff like that, as well as being a defence of the city of Dublin. But of course today, the only thing it safe keeps today is weeds. And the weeds down here, of course, being near the marshy waters, are sea pearlwort and star pearlwort and yellow cress and wild celery and hard seagrass and dandelions and ginny jowls. I'll have to pick a bunch of them before I go home. Now the military were here, and in 1843 the guns were lined up along the wall here, facing across at Clontarf, and the orders were that if Daniel O'Connell and his Repeal Association attempted to set foot on Clontarf, they were to be blasted off it by the cannon guns that were along the walls of the Pigeon House fort. Now, of course, in latter years after the 20s, the Dublin Corporation had a hospital here for tuberculosis. And then, of course, the Pigeon House was run down and the ESB moved in and took over the latter half of the Pigeon House. The Pigeon House, or Pigeon House, well, we all know that it got its name from John Pigeon, who was sent down here to a small house way back in the early 18th century. And John's job was to look out to sea and to watch for shipwrecks. And if any shipwrecks came, John was the boy that went out and laid claim to the salvage. Now, John's wife was a great businesswoman. And of course the boats used to come in at the Poolbeg, and she decided she'd start a little bit of bed and breakfast, or breakfast for the passengers coming off the boat. And eventually the bed and breakfast turned into a hotel. And the Pigeon House became a very popular resort for tourists and travellers and anyone that cared to come down to dine off the beautiful Poolbeg oysters that Mrs. Pigeon put on the tables, along with the beer, of course. Well, this is what's known as the Great South Wall, leading down to the Poolbeg Lighthouse. The Poolbeg Lighthouse was erected in 1761 after numerous shipwrecks on the rocks around the coast of Dublin. And then they built the wall right in to link up with the Pigeon House. Of course, here you have a magnificent sight. You have way over on the right behind me a beautiful view of Hope, and all across the Dollymount and Clontarf coastline. And of course, over on the left, you have the Dublin Mountains swinging right out to meet the Wicklow Mountains, over to the Sugarloaf, to the Killiney coast, and right on down to Wicklow. Now, Poolbeg gets its name from the small pool, Poolbeg. The large pool was known as Clontarf Pool. So this became Poolbeg, the small pool, down to the breakwater here of the Great South Wall.
There's queer things in Dublin, between Holt and Cromwell. Down in Ringsend there's a five-legged cat and a three-legged donkey, a two-headed monkey. There's nothing so queer as his four-faced outlaw. There's a clock in old Dublin that stands on the steep.
The Ringsend people are a friendly and clannish type people. They are very proud of their heritage, which has been handed down by their fathers, and their fathers' fathers. The tradition of round seamen, dockers, industrial workers, and all the fine traditions that are here in Ringsend.
There's queer things in Dublin, between Howth and Cromwell. Down in Ringsend there's a five-legged cat, and a three-legged donkey, and a two-headed monkey. There's nothing so queer as this four-faced outlaw. There's queer things in Dublin, between Howth and Cromwell. Down in Ringsend there's a five-legged cat, and a three-legged donkey, a two-headed monkey. There's nothing so queer as this four-faced outlaw.